Hello and welcome back for another episode of Show Off Your CI/CD Pipeline. Today I'm here with John. John, hey, welcome.
Hey, good morning. How's it going?
Morning. Where are you based in?
I'm based out of London in the UK. A little introduction about me. So I'm a AWS community builder, just like yourself. Probably not as popular as you are, because you've been doing quite a bit of work for us. And professionally, I work as a principal cloud engineer for Sainsbury's in the UK. Sainsbury's is the #1 retail groceries shop that you can find in the UK. Think of your I don't actually remember what the name of like big retail companies and grocery shop are in Germany. I should know.
Well, I don't think that you need to, but we have Edeka, we have Aldi, right? That kind of stuff. And I think Aldi is also around in UK. So thank you
Yeah.
so much for getting on. And what do you do on a daily basis as a principal architect?
So my job. So I drive a small team of cloud engineers, and again I use the word cloud engineers. You can probably put a different number of stickers on it, such as DevOps engineer, a bit of SRE as well, I suppose. What I do is I drive the team, and what we do is make sure that we build all the tooling that our developers need in order to deploy their applications. At the end of the day, the developers are customers, if that makes sense. And so what we're trying really to do is help them with everything around CI/CD pipelines, to give them all of the tooling to be self-sufficient as possible, just for the purpose of them being able to deploy applications into production as quick as possible.
So this is sounds a little bit like a platform engineering role, the way that I see it, or is it different?
So obviously Sainsbury's is a very large company, so there's already a team that looks after the AWS accounts provisioning, puts in place a lot of security barriers and all of those things. We focus solely on making sure that the applications are up and running. Again, like I said, provide the developers with all of the support they need to get through the AWS, finding where their services are running, logs and all of those sort of things, but also obviously focus on automation. So it's really about automating everything that the developers will want to do on a day-to-day basis, and make sure that we are not needed. My success criteria is something happens at 2 a.m. and nobody from my team has been woken up because the developers had all the tools they needed in order to go and fix forward.
Yeah, that sounds cool. That's exactly what I think we need to be aiming for, right? We need to ensure that we can automate all parts of our processes, right? So I really love that idea and that mindset. So great to have you on the show. What are we going to talk about today?
Sure. So something we're going to talk about today. So I think that there's a lot of really great content around on the internet to try to help people with setting up their CI/CD pipelines. I personally, for my own personal things, but also within Sainsbury, we've decided to use AWS CodeStar tools, so AWS CodePipeline, CodeBuild, and so on, to deploy all of our applications along with AWS CloudFormation. And so what I wanted to do, and one of the things we've done, is automating, basically setting up all of the IAM resources that you need in order to do a cross and multi-account deployment. Because at the end of the day, once you have the IAM structure, adding 1 or 20 or 100 pipelines, I think we have north of 200 and something pipelines across just our business unit. It is super straightforward. Once you have the security barriers in place, trying to go with list privileges as much as possible and so on, and follow the best practices. Again, having developers create new pipelines to deploy applications is actually pretty straightforward. I mean, it can be tricky at times, but the objective again is to trying to keep things simple enough that it's easily supportable. Because one of the problems that we face today is turnover. I don't think there is a single company that can say, no, we don't have a crazy turnover of our tech people. And so trying to keep things simple and supportable by the next person, and have people who are able to come in and quickly pick up on what's been going on, how things work, is to me crucial in terms of operations capability.
And that means that you have multiple pipelines or hundred of pipelines is what you just said. That means one pipeline per microservice, which then essentially deploys the microservice from the developer's desk until production. Is that what I'm hearing?
Pretty much. So we have a few teams that use monorepo, so they will be deploying more than one microservice together. But that's usually when they are extremely couply tight with each other, which makes sense. But otherwise, yes, we do have about a pipeline per microservice at this point.
And you're then sharing that pipeline code or pipeline structure between the different microservices. So it's kind of one common pipeline that is then just instituted with multiple executions, I would assume.
Yeah, exactly. So as if we get the time to go into the demo today, we'll be able to show basically one of the things we put in place for developers where, I mean, again, I've had to remove a number of things in there, but the essence of it is a developer can clone what we call a cookie cutter, fill in a few blanks, and automatically it will create them what will be the baseline Git repository for them. And in that Git repository, you'll find pretty much everything that you need in order to have the pipeline being deployed. People will know exactly where they can put write their code. There'll already be things like the Docker files and Docker Compose files and all of those things that people need. And the objective, and some of our most senior developers at this point are able to use that cookie cutter, start to write some code, and have an application deployed within probably about a half hour. And they could go all the way to production without any real barriers if they really wanted to.
Cool. So that's what I want to see, right? So let's stop the boring introduction part and let's look at code. So whenever you're ready, go ahead and start sharing your screen so we can look at what you have, and especially that setup of setting up a new project, right? Looks like something that I'm very curious about.
Yeah, so I have actually documented this quite a long time ago as part of what I call the ComposeX labs. Again, ComposeX being an open source umbrella of many different projects that I have. And so basically what I did is I have a CloudFormation template and an Ansible role that you can use, and it was would take care of the setup for up to 3 accounts potentially, or a single account, or just 2. It's really up to how you want to use the role, the playbook. And everything is available. Is my screen share? Yes. Everything is available online and in Git. So I'm not going to go through all of the details of this. What I'm going to do is I'll probably just run the command in a minute. But the nutshell of it, I suppose, sorry, here we go. The nutshell of it is that it can look a little daunting the first time around when you have to think about all the different things that you require in order to have a multi-account deployment pipeline. But again, once you've got if you have a good strategy and a good naming convention in particular, and we'll see that in a minute as to why. It's actually very straightforward to create all the things that you need. Have something that looks architecturally like this, where you've got the S3 buckets that you need to store all of your build artifacts, all of your logs, all of the test outputs. We use CodeBuild and the test outputs quite a lot to do validation, that we do cut coverage and all sorts of things. You've got a CloudFormation template bucket, because we use CloudFormation all over the place. So we need to have a place where we're going to store our templates, which also helps with disaster recovery. You have all the templates technically to deploy your resources. So if something wrong happens, you can just pick the templates up and put them somewhere else. Very handy. And then at the end of the day, you just deploy to AWS accounts. So the way to get started is basically you'd go to the Git repository, which you can clone. And in the Git repository, you'll find it's actually a submodule to this repository, where in which there is the whole setup on how you get started. So what you see in the blog post is exactly what is in the Git repository. I try to do documentation from source code as much as possible.
Cool.
At the end of the day, so makes life easy. Cool. So what I'm going to do, so obviously I'm going to stop sharing the screen and share the terminal. You need to tell me if that is too small. And what we can do is, nope, hold on. There you go. Is that big enough? Is that something that you can read?
I'm still waiting for the screen share, so let's give it a second.
No worries. Has it loaded up yet?
No.
All right, let's try again.
Let's try again.
That's the joys of being live, isn't it? Okay, allow.
Yeah. The good part is we're recording this, but I'm gonna leave this in. I don't like editing stuff.
Right. If it's still not sharing, that's fine. I'm not too sure as to what's going on.
It is sharing now, so we can move on.
Fantastic. Brilliant. So what I've done so far is I've literally just created a virtual environment in Python, which again is documented in the guide. So you just follow the README, and what you do is you direct yourself to the AWS account setup folder, and in there you'll find the Ansible playbook. The playbook is very straightforward. Again,
just one second. What is Ansible? Because people, I think, not everyone will know that.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little old school. I used Ansible when version was like 1.6, I think. So, right, fair enough. So Ansible is for lack of a better word, it's actually hard to describe now. It's a tool that allows you to create roles and playbooks that you can. Oh man, it's actually a very difficult.
It's a hard question at the end if you never thought about it, right? So it's a configuration management tool at the end. It gives you the possibility to manage your infrastructure configuration. It was originally, it comes from, I think, managing servers and all of that kind of cool stuff that we don't want to do anymore, right? But it has evolved a lot to be able to also manage other parts and other things. And I think you're mainly using the functionality here to execute playbooks and then change cloud infrastructure, right? So you can also use Ansible to manage AWS resources, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I used to use Ansible with Anger, like I said, many years ago. I never really thought of describing it to somebody else before. But yeah, you absolutely can use Ansible to provision infrastructure wherever it is. Mm-hmm. And definitely when I used to build AMIs, if you use Ansible and Packer together, this was the perfect pair to basically automate all of your AWS machine images. Mm-hmm. It's really fantastic. And I think one of the great things of Ansible versus other things, especially at the time, such as Chef or Puppet, is that you don't need a server to manage anything. You can literally run everything from your machine. And I've done many deployments using Ansible in the past. It's evolved tremendously. I won't lie to you. A year ago, when I went back to doing some of it, it was a bit of a shock. But otherwise, it does work fantastically well. And typically, this is one of those use cases where it's very easy to put together a chain of events where you want to have a number of inputs and outputs controlled and reused. And typically here, the playbook, again, like I said, is very straightforward. Is going to get details from your so again, in the structure, you've got the management accounts, the non-prod account, and the production account. Mm-hmm. Is going to get the details of all of those accounts and create CloudFormation resources to deploy all of the IAM bucket and encryption key required, and give permissions to all the things. Okay. So it's very straightforward at the end of the day. So the way you would run the playbook is, again, I don't think it looks great on the terminal now because it's a little barbaric. But you just say Ansible playbook, then the playbook file itself. And then all you need to do as an argument with the -e parameter is your credential profiles. So the only other thing you have to set up before you run the playbook is your AWS credentials profiles on your machine and run with it. So typically here, the default account is going to be our management account, which is going to be where you'll have all of your CodeBuild projects, all of your CodePipeline projects, and all of that stuff. And then very, very intelligently named, I've got a dev account and then the prod account called Lambda Dev and Lambda Prod. And if you run the playbook, what it's going to do is going to, like I said, gather all the resources, all the details about your account. So obviously I've run that in the past. What it's going to tell me now is actually, it's going to tell me I don't need to create a KMS key stack. It already exists and all those sort of things. So it's actually also Ansible is also very good at being able to replay. If things don't need to be changed, it's just going to go, okay, that already exists. I don't need to do anything about it. And great. Well, it failed. Fantastic. Again, demo effect for me today.
That's perfect.
Yes, indeed. But
we don't want you to triage what that actually means or what the root cause is. I think the main idea here really is that we have an Ansible playbook which sets up most of the required IAM structure. And that IAM structure, I think, is what we're setting up, is then going to be used as part of the CI/CD pipeline radar, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's not even where this is kind of not quite the value of what you do, because this is something you're going to do once. And probably right now, Ansible is telling me, well, actually, I'm trying to do a thing. I don't need to make any updates because everything has already been set up properly. And if I go to my AWS account, I can see that the stacks have already been created a little earlier without any issues. So I'll just teach me for being too prepared. But the other thing again is that in the repository there's a folder called app cookie cutter boilerplate, which is where which is typically again a cookie cutter. Cookie cutter is an open source project that is actually used by the SAM CLI, where you can define the structure of the folders and the files, and it uses Jinja templates and all the sort of things where you can basically put in a few inputs, and it's going to generate all of the different files for all of sorts of different files for you, and just run with it.
Is that similar? Is that similar to Progen, in a sense?
I'm not familiar with Progen, but think of it, if you take something like Spring Boot, for example. Spring Boot, for example, you'll be able to go online, or there's a generator, and you're going to be able to say, hey, I want to start something like that. Or again, if I go back to the SAM CLI and you say SAM init, it's going to ask you a few questions, what you want to do, and it's going to generate all the files and CloudFormation templates and so on for you to be able to move on with your SAM development.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so Progen can be used for the same at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you use cookie cutter, which again you install with Python, and it's extremely well documented, then you point it to the cookie cutter itself. So here the repository is CodePipeline Orchestra, and then the name of the boilerplate is here, like I said, app pipeline boilerplate. And if you say enter, it's going to ask you a few questions. So for example, the name of the app, so my new app, it's a placeholder, so you can change it and call it whatever. So if I do app demo, then team code, that's going to be for me. The GitHub organization, because one of the things it's going to try to do is populate all of the details that you're going to need. So for example, if I put it in my ComposeX organization, you just enter, and then it's suggesting the name of a repository. So, okay, I'm going to go for that. And here's the only thing, is the only time where you'll have to enter something that is related to CodePipeline. So CodePipeline has this very neat feature now, especially with GitHub, to create a CodeStyle connection, which allows to basically never have to enter any credentials anymore to link CodePipeline and CodePipeline in your GitHub account. And CodePipeline will be able to create all of the different webhooks and all of those sort of things for you on your behalf in order to be able to be notified when there's a change in the branch that you're monitoring. So there you go, short description. And as far as code, we'll just go for something else. Right, and now if I go to John Preston app demo, I end up into a repository where I've got pretty much everything laid out. And there's a very cleverly named folder called CI/CD, in which you will find the release pipeline.
Wow,
so again,
cool.
this is a CloudFormation template. And again, so you could use CDK to do all those things, whatever, but I've been using CloudFormation since pretty much the day it was created. And this service, this is a service that I really love. It's probably fighting with IAM as being number one of the services that I really enjoy with Amazon. I know it's weird to say that.
So, let me ask a question.
Yeah.
Do you come from a developer's background, or do you come from an infrastructure management background?
That's a great question. Well, I probably I want to say that I am a sysadmin born in the cloud, but as far as uni, I definitely was a developer.
Okay.
So I started with C as a language, and then as I went into the world of the wonderful world of cloud, I just moved on to Python, and at this point, I've never really looked back.
Okay.
So
Okay.
yeah,
So I was just asking, right, before because CDK generates CloudFormation, and if I ever can avoid writing YAML or JSON, I will do, right? So that's why I'm trying to use CDK wherever I can, and that's just
So instead of CDK, I've been using Troposphere for a long time, which
okay.
basically does the same. And again, it's a Python library. So I do there. When you know how to use CloudFormation, writing CloudFormation templates and editing CloudFormation templates is really straightforward.
That's true. Yeah.
So I remember when Troposphere came out, the very first versions, I was like, hold on a second, why should I need to do all of this? I don't need to do all of that. I can write CloudFormation templates. Why do I need all of this? And it's only until I really started to work into my open source project, ECS ComposeX, where I was like, okay, I'm actually going to need some way to generate CloudFormation templates as I go with random definitions. And at the time, CDK for Python actually was very early days. And again, if you go onto the documentation for ComposeX, you'll find a whole section that explains why I don't use CDK. Most importantly, for me, in terms of adoption for users, if you go to the CloudFormation documentation and you look at the properties of a CloudFormation resource, you should be able to copy paste the definition into your code and be able to just do quick edits, which is something that Troposphere allows you to do. But CDK forces you to rename absolutely everything. So I was like, in terms of adoption, you need to move on. Anyway, besides the point,
you're right.
I'll go on tangents. So let's go back to the important bits. So if I look at the release pipeline here, the template itself, the reason why I say it's important to have a good naming convention is typically you don't want to have to do input values all the time. So one of the things that the previous CloudFormation templates that were created with the Ansible playbook is to create some export values. So again, export values in CloudFormation are things that you can only define once. Sorry, it's unique per region, and once you start using it, you can never delete the resource that it's associated with, which is extremely valuable. You don't want people to go and delete your KMS key by mistake, or your S3 bucket that you're storing all of your all of your artifacts with. And
however, that's only true if you then actually use CloudFormation for all of your deployments, right? So you need to consider that, right? So if you use a mixture, like partly provisioning CloudFormation and partly then using Terraform or something else, right, then you will not get that benefit, right?
Yeah. So, well, I suppose you're right. Yeah. If you use something, if you don't use CloudFormation, I mean, it's a fair point to say that it might not work for people who would want to use Terraform and all of that sort of things. Yeah, but equally then, if you start using Terraform and all those sort of things, you have a whole different breadth of problems where you'll have to give cross-account access and all of those sort of things, and have to manage concurrency, which is something you can do, and Terraform has evolved quite significantly over the years to help with all of those constraints. But I personally find CloudFormation. I think at the end of the day, CloudFormation is a service. Terraform is a software. I much prefer to offload as many things off to a service as opposed to become an expert on the software.
I cannot agree more.
So basically, back to the template itself. If you just use the template and go to your CloudFormation console and use the template, it will ask you a few questions such as, what's the name of your repository in GitHub, right? And all of those sort of things. And what it's going to do is it's going to create the pipeline with a deployment to a dev environment and a deployment to a prod environment. And obviously, you can then tweak the template to add as many deployment phases or stages as you want. So we typically have at least 3 stages: one deployment to dev, one deployment to staging, and after the deployment to staging, we have another CodeBuild execution that is going to run end-to-end testing to validate that everything is working before we can go into production. And one of the reasons why we standardized onto this pattern for all of our services, one of the reasons is support. Like I said, we're actually a very small team. We've got a ratio of 1 to 12, or 1 to 16 cloud engineer per developer. So each one of us is actually managing a lot of people. So we have to have as much consistency as possible. We also like to go on holiday. So you need to have a way to have people go away without being absolutely required for the project to be able to carry on or be supported. And so we standardized on this structure very early on for all of our services in order to get all of the benefits out of it that we could. And the developers actually now, we had again, like I said, we had a lot of turnover, like any other company, and it's actually quick for the developers to pick it up. So the ones that have been with us for quite a long time now understand fairly well the pipeline, can do tweakings themselves. But the new developers don't even have to worry about all of this, because one of the things that there is in the repository is a make file, and you can just do make ECR, creates my ECR repository, and then make pipeline, and it creates the cloud. It's going to actually do CloudFormation, create the stack with this template, and move on. So they barely need to know how any of the pipeline actually works behind the scenes in any great details. They just need to know that it's there for them to use, and it's going to allow them to deploy their applications.
Makes sense. Cool.
So for the purpose of time, I don't think we'll have quite the time to do a demo, but
let's at least have a look on the pipeline and the steps that you have as part of the pipeline, right? So maybe we can, if you have a deployed version of the pipeline, we could look at that.
Absolutely. Let me switch screen again, and I'll share my screen.
Now it works. Cool.
Great. Cool. So you just head to CodePipeline, and then you're going to find a pipeline. So typically, as you can see, I mean, I have the one of the great things of CodePipeline is that the templates that I've created worked a very long time ago. The pipeline, however, doesn't quite didn't really quite complain with what I wanted to do yesterday in terms of demos. But that is it in a nutshell. And again, I have it documented somewhere else where you can see the whole pipeline when it's successful and all those sort of things. So again, apologies for being really, really badly prepared. But the workflow is very much so exactly this every single time for every pipeline. So you're going to have the source. Obviously, you would get the source to normally be GitHub instead of code commits, as I did the demo earlier. Then you do the build part. So the build part is where you're going to get all of your artifacts built. So again, for us, it's mostly Java applications where you're going to get a jar file. Then we drop the jar file into a Docker image, publish the Docker image to ECR, and then move on.
So question. So part of that step that we're looking at right now is executing unit tests. It is executing the Java build process, which generates a jar file, but it also includes building the Docker image, right? So this is all what happens as part of that. Yep. Okay, cool. Thank you.
So yeah. So for on a day-to-day basis, when developers open PRs, there's a separate CodeBuild project that would get triggered as soon as the PR is open and run a lot of unit tests. The same thing happens, the exact same thing, and again, this is one of the great things about consistency, is the exact same thing happens at the build process in the pipeline, with the only difference of actually building the Docker image. That is the only difference between the two stages, really. Okay. And once it builds the Docker image, the other thing that it does is, again, use this open source project that I mentioned before, ECS ComposeX, that is going to take the Docker Compose file and translate all of the Compose file into CloudFormation templates. And the next steps really is just about telling CloudFormation, hey, here's a template, go and use it and deploy stack. Right. And so typically deploy to dev, destroy dev. So one of the things that I like to do is destroy my dev environments because I don't need to pay for them 24/7. So you build a dev environment, you do all your tests.
Just gonna, just one point on that. I had an episode with Matt Martz yesterday, another builder, right, that I put on public, where he built some CloudFormation templates or CloudFormation stacks that will then automatically destroy themselves after a while, right? So this might be a pattern that you can also adopt here.
Well, so here I think the objective was to be able to deploy to dev and run as many tests as you want. And then once the dev want to move on to the next phase, and again, this is one of the great things of CodePipeline. You can add steps. So, for example, there's an approval here. You could put an approval just before the deletion of the stack. So, if you want to quickly iterate of your dev stage, you deploy. And once you're done with all your tests, you can say, okay, everything has been validated. We've got all the test reports. Everything says it's good to go.
Okay, got
approved. You move on to the next phase. So deleting the stack is really up to whether you want to or not. Again, it's absolutely not mandatory. And a lot of people actually sometimes feel like they want to keep their dev and staging environments for a longer period of time. It's really up to how people feel about it.
Okay, got it.
So that's it, really. At the end of the day, it goes through this process. At the end of the day, you end up to approving to deploying to prod. You deploy to prod, and then your application is deployed to prod. And I think the major value of having a pipeline like this one is that the way you're deploying to dev and then to staging or UAT or whatever, a number of environments that you may have in between your code and your production environment, is that the way you're deploying your application all the way up to prod is the same way every single time. So it doesn't mean that deployment to prod is guaranteed every single time. There's always going to be snafus, especially if you have data that is involved in databases and you need to do databases upgrades and all those sort of things. You always have those risks and those problems potentially. But at the end of the day, you have a very high you've got a very, very high chance of success because you consistently deploy in the same manner with the same tools and the same services.
What I did not see, maybe I missed it, is integration tests or something like that. So after a deployment, I think you mentioned you have a separate pipeline for that a little bit earlier.
No, well, so what I mentioned is that so again, the pipeline that I'm sharing here is a pipeline that I have for myself that I haven't executed in quite a while. I have other pipelines, obviously, in the company accounts that I can't share for obvious reasons. But in a nutshell, no, the developers, one of the parameters of the pipeline of the stack is, do you have a repository for tests? Because we have dedicated end-to-end test engineers, and they write. So the developers are responsible for writing all of the unit testing and local testing, all of those sort of things, which gets executed when the PRs get open, and again at the build process. But then there's we have another aspect of things where we have people who basically take in the business business requirements and transform those business requirements into tests for behavior testing. Not so much for unit testing, but much more for behavior testing. And this is something that gets added into the pipeline.
Okay.
And so there isn't one here, but again, this is one of those things that we definitely do in order to make sure that everything end-to-end works properly before we go into production.
Okay, cool. Then, thank you so much for sharing those details. Now,
you're most welcome. Detail.
I'm gonna ask kind of a difficult thing. So what I've been doing and talking a lot about with other community builders is why do we do things different in our open source world than we do in corporate, right? So what that means is that you just mentioned, we're not, I cannot share my corporate pipeline, but at the same time you mentioned that your corporate pipeline has so much more steps and things that you need to do, right? So what's your take on why are our open source pipelines bad?
I don't think they're necessarily bad. Like I said, typically the template that is shared in the repository with the cookie cutter does have all of the built-in steps for testing if you do implement the testing. But as far as open sourcing, I mean, again, this I'm not willing to share the pipeline is more so that I don't want, not like, it's my own AWS account, right? If somebody is watching this video later, looks at the account numbers and starts to want to poke around with my account, well, it's my own problem. So this is the only reason why I'm not sharing the corporate ones, because otherwise I have absolutely no problems sharing what we do. And like I said, a lot of what we do is exactly what's in those open source repositories. So I don't think there is any state secrets. And again, the company I work for is not a managed service provider or a consultancy agency.
I think that's not what I wanted to get at, right? I wanted to get at, in a corporate world, you would want to have, from a best practices perspective, include security scans, include dynamic scanning, include automation static scanning, static code analysis, include guardrails for measuring code coverage and these kind of things, right? At least that's what what we do in our organization, right? But in all of the CI/CD most of the CI/CD open source pieces that I've looked at, right, or that we've talked about here in this channel, there's not a lot of things included.
Well, we do have again our own tooling to do static code analysis. But again, I think that the wealth of different services that you can use out there in the world to do static code analysis, for example, is vast and deep. Again, you're gonna go for the tools that are available to you and the ones that work for you. I personally do that for every single open source project that I have. So any Docker image that I publish, because again, I publish a few services and a few Docker images, and I absolutely do static code analysis. I use, it comes out almost for free. So I do use ECR scanning. I even have yet another open source project that forces my ECR scanning to happen every 30 days. Okay. So I'm aware, later down the line, did I have vulnerabilities? So I don't think that nobody's showing this necessarily. Okay. I think it's really down to people's maturity with the tooling. 3 years ago, I was horrible at all of this, right? I'll be honest with you. 3 years ago, there's a number of things that I do today that I would probably not have even thought of doing at the time. And so it's just a learning curve. And I think that, typically having those conversations with yourself and other people in the world that try to democratize and publicize what people do in the world to help with application development in their CI/CD pipelines is what's going to bring awareness about all of those things in the world and get us to a better place.
Yeah, that's what I hope for. So thank you so much for those insights and that feedback. I think we need to talk a little bit more about that as a community, right? So not looking on you personally, but looking on others. And in all of the interviews that I did with builders, right, it's a common pattern, right, that we tend to have things in mind that we then do not include or not talk about, right? And that's something that I'm trying to change. So where can people find more about you online? Maybe can you
sure.
pitch a little bit for yourself?
Sure. So I'm available on LinkedIn. You can find me under my legal name, John Mille. But otherwise, since I was something like 12 years old, online you'll find me as John Preston. So you'll find me on GitHub and all of those different platforms, Discord, and other places, and Twitter as John Preston.
Is that your gamer tag then?
Yes, exactly. No.
Okay. So I talked to Dave Itzbitsky lately, who runs the developers podcast, AWS developers podcast, right? And the gamer tag should be a secret, is what he's saying, because otherwise people will stalk him, right? So now be prepared for whatever game you play. What are you playing at the moment?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm a very boring person, so I like CloudFormation templates and all of those things. So the sort of games that I play are games like Factorio these days, or Satisfactory, which is about basically automating all the things. So automation never really stops. It is the sort of games. I used to play a lot of other different games, such as Counter-Strike Source and such, but it's a little behind me now. I'm mostly focusing when I'm not coding. or automating something with CloudFormation templates and so on, I'm probably playing one of those games where I'm actually automating, building giant factories and so on, or just play with trains, really.
Whoa, cool. I'm going to share with you Bitburner. It's a hacking game at the end, right? Which can also be fun because you also need to do some code. And I think we need to do these kind of things, right? To stay healthy. Cool. So last question. What do you expect from the Builders program in the next year? Any thoughts around that?
Wow. I've joined. I think we've joined the same batch last year, somewhere in August, and I think that the community builder is a really great place to exchange. I think that in terms of, I don't have necessarily expectations as to what it's going to be. I think that the community builder managers are doing an excellent job at bringing a lot of value to the builders. I think in terms of interactions with the different builders, if there's an ask, it's basically for people to have a look at the sort of things that I work on, or bring me their use cases and say, hey, I'm actually trying to do those things. Have you happened to deal with it before? And potentially, can you help me with making it work? So those sort of interactions, I suppose. But otherwise, no, I think the community builder project is doing absolutely great.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And also, thank you so much for being on the show today, John. It was a pleasure to look at that. Please make sure that we can get the links to your work being added to the show notes as well, so people can also look at the code and hopefully also contribute some, or at least comment on the code, right? Because that's something that in open source does not happen too often, right? That you get a direct feedback. So it would be really cool if the audience could engage with you a little bit. And with that,
absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And I hope that we do more stuff together in the next Builders year, right? So have a great rest of your day, and talk to you soon.
You too. Cheers.
Bye. Cheers.